Okay, welcome. Welcome to this webinar on the early awareness and action system for advanced materials. So, can we go to the next slide, please? So you will have seen that we're going to have simultaneous interpretation. I have just posted on the chat some information. You need to be able to see this interpretation button. So please, if you don't see it, you should reload the Zoom system. So if we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so as I was mentioning, there is interpretation. There will be English and Spanish. So you can choose via the interpretation button the language that you wish to follow the webinar on. Next slide. Just to remind you, we are offering interpretation for remote meetings on Zoom. The idea is really to facilitate the communication, but it does not constitute an authentic record. So only the original speech in English is authentic. We will be trying to speak as low as possible so the interpreters have time to translate everything, of course. And but if you have any questions, you will be able to raise them at the end and during the webinar. Next slide. So just to get familiar, there are two main buttons that you should be using during this webinar. One is the function chat. And for this, I will be posting links related to the presentation that is being made today. And if you have any question, we will appreciate that you put them via the function Q&A. So next to the chat button, you have another little button. And this way, all the speakers and the panelists will be able to read your question, and they will be able to answer them at the end because they do not have access to the function chat. Okay, so just please keep the chat to retrieve links and also to communicate with me and my colleagues in case that you have some technical difficulties. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we have several speakers that will be helping us and that will be explaining the Early4AdMa for you. So first we have Katrin Schwern. She's a scientific staff member at the German Environment Agency since 2009. Katrin has a diploma in environmental engineering, and she completed her PhD at the University of Halle-Wittenberg as a member of the International Max Planck Research School for Science and Technology for Nanosystem. At UBA, her work focuses on environmental risk assessment and regulation of nanomaterials. She has been a part of the German delegation to the OECD Working Party on Manufactured Nanomaterial that is leading this work. And her main emphasis and her current work is really on the amendments of OECD test guidelines and guidance documents on the specificities of nanomaterials. And the idea is really to adapt them to current legislation on chemical safety. And last but not least, she's also leading the work on advanced materials within the OECD. Katrin is also sharing responsibilities with Agnes Omen, who's a senior scientific staff member at the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment, the RIVM in the Netherlands. After her study molecular science at the Wageningen University, Omen did her PhD research at the Institute for Risk Assessment Science at the Utrecht University. After obtaining her doctoral degree, Agnes started working as a scientific staff member at IRM. And since 2008, she works there as a senior scientific staff member. Agnes has contributed to projects for ministries as well as to the European project. She also acts as an expert for international organizations such as EFSA, ECHA, and of course, the OECD. We have with us also Elmer Swart, who's a biologist by training with a PhD in nanotoxicology. He is now working for the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment and at the Netherlands as a scientific officer, among other things, safety aspects of nanomaterials and advanced materials in various national and international programs. And he's also one of the main authors of this program that we're going to be presenting, this approach that we're going to be presenting today. We have Wendell Wolleben is a senior principal scientist at SPAF Global Research in the Department of Analytical and Material Science, and has a second affiliation to the Department of Experimental Toxicology and Ecology. His research covers both the development of advanced materials and the assessment of safe uses. Wendell studied physics in Heidelberg, Paris, and Munich, and worked as a postdoc in physical chemistry in Marburg, and has been a visiting scientist at the Weizmann Institute at the Harvard School of Public Health. You will hear from Wendell later on a specific case study where he's also involved with several European projects. Blanca Suarez Merino, she holds a PhD from Oxford Biochemistry. She's the Director of Regulatory Affairs at the Nanotechnology Industries Association, and she's also the co-founder of TEMA Solution. Her main activities are to provide regulatory support to industry on processes and products containing nanomaterials on the different regulations, so whether REACH, occupational health, biocide, food, medical devices, and cosmetic. She's a national expert for the Swiss Association for Standardization, and she coordinates the standard work on safe and sustainable by design at CEN Nanotechnologies. Finally, we have Doris Volker, who's also a scientific staff member at the German environmental agency UBA. Doris has a PhD in natural science from the Technical University of Dresden, and her focus at UBA is on the environmental risk assessment of nanomaterials and the need for adaptation of methods and instruments to provide reliable data to comply with regulatory information requirements. Since 2009, she's a German representative to the OECD program on nanosafety. And currently, she's focusing on the development of nano-specific OECD test guidelines and guidance document. For this same, she has supervised a number of national research projects addressing test methods development. So you can see that all of our experts today have been involved with the OECD work on nanomaterials for several years, and they're also involved in other international initiatives. So they provide support in different WPMN or Working Party on Manufacturing Nanomaterial discussion groups regarding the safety and sustainable related issues of nanomaterials and other innovative materials, also known as advanced materials. I do want also to thank our colleagues Yannick and Nicole, who will be helping us with the interpretation today. And with this, I think we can go to the next slide. And just to remind you about the agenda for today, so you will hear the OECD will have the rationale behind the work on advanced materials at the OECD. We will have some background to the Early4AdMa system and the connection to the safer and sustainable innovation approach, also developed within the OECD. We will hear in detail the Early4AdMa approach from Elmer, and then we will have the presentation of a couple of case studies, as well as future work that we foresee in the coming year. And with this, we're going to have some concluding remarks, and you will have an opportunity to have questions. And as I remind you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so the speakers can see them and respond to them during this session. Next slide. And with this, I'm just going to give the floor to Catherine so she can start with the presentation. And I hope you all enjoy the webinar. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mar, for the introduction, and welcome to everybody, also from my side. Before we start with the Early4AdMa, I would like to give you some background on the OECD and the WPMN and why WPMN works on the topic advanced materials. Next slide, please. So the OECD, it's an international organization that works to build better policy for better lives. And the overarching decision body of the OECD and its committees is the OECD Council. And the OECD Council is the umbrella for around 300 committees, expert groups, and working groups. And the Working Party on Manufactured Nanomaterial is one of 12 working parties within the Chemicals and Biotechnical Committee, in short, the CPC. And the aim of the CPC is to develop harmonized instruments for the safety assessment of chemicals. The CPC is supported by 38 member countries, as well as the European Commission and its institutes, but also by observer countries like South Africa, Thailand, or Malaysia. And it is also supported by stakeholders like environmental NGOs, industry, welfare organization, or labor organization, and other international governmental organizations. Next. The Working Party itself was established in 2006, and it's a global forum for policy discussions on nanomaterials, but since 2021 also on advanced materials. And the aim is to assist the implementation of safety policy and regulatory preparedness within the member countries and the other supporting countries. And the implementation of the work of program of the WPMN is carried out in so-called steering groups, which comprises nominated experts. And the steering groups of the WPMN are the steering group on testing and assessment, which provide guidance for hazard assessment and facilitates the development of nanospecific OECD test guideline and guidance documents. The steering group on exposure, which provides guidance for exposure assessment and exposure mitigation. And then two new steering groups, the one on the safer and sustainable innovation approach. And last but not least, the steering group of advanced materials, which will present it today. Next. So what makes advanced materials important? Advanced materials promises technical solution for major challenges of our current but also future society. Examples are here materials for energy transition, for healthcare, construction, but also mobility or agriculture and electronic sectors. One prominent example for advanced materials are, for instance, graphene and graphene-related materials. Large investigations have been undertaken to develop advanced materials and to bring them into application. Next. So why is OECD WPMN addressing advanced materials? During the work on nanomaterials that has been undertaken since 2006, experience were gained that safety consideration on new materials should not be limited to an upper size limit of 100 nanometers. And it becomes clear that some of the advanced materials have similar or additional challenges to those identified for nanomaterials. It can be expected that they provide same challenges for the chemical safety. Many of these materials poses or display additional complexity, for instance, due to new or enhanced functionality or due to multiple components. Therefore, the question arises on whether a current risk assessment can always ensure the safety application and use of such materials. And with the background on discussion on safe and sustainable by design, but also on the safer innovation approach, it becomes clear that some of these materials pose also challenges regarding the sustainability throughout their whole life cycle, which includes aspects like recycling and waste handling, but also others. Next slide, please. So the OECD steering group itself was established in 2021, and it comprises representatives from 24 delegations worldwide. The aim of the steering group is to develop a strategic approach to support regulatory preparedness and safe and sustainable by design of advanced materials and their applications. The current program of work is to gather information on research and activities within the delegations, to develop a working description of advanced materials that has already been finalized, and documents can be found at the OECD website. A main corner of the work is to develop a framework that supports the regulatory preparedness and safe and sustainable by design. And here the Early4AdMa system comes into play, which will be presented at the next slides by my colleagues. And also this document has been published already at the OECD website. And the next point is to carry out case studies on selected advanced materials to learn about their issues, and last but not least, to develop recommendations on the next steps. Next slide. Here, I give you a short overview about the working description of advanced materials. So this working description aims to describe the playing field of advanced materials within the WPMN, and it describes in which context the WPMN is engaged with advanced materials. As the work of the Working Party of Manufactured Nanomaterials comes from the topic of nanomaterials, the starting point of the advanced materials within the WPMN are nanomaterials, but the scope is not limited to the nanoscale materials. And the working description acknowledged that what we consider as advanced materials today may be changed over the time due to increased knowledge about these materials, due to technical process, or due to established regulatory implementation. And beside a more general description of what we understand by advanced materials, the annex provides also examples what the various delegation understood as an advanced materials. And for more details, you can have a look at this document at the OECD website. Next slide. For the strategic approach that has been developed in the Working Party, the so-called Early Awareness and Action System of Advanced Materials, in short, the Early4AdMa, we see two advantages of this system. On the one hand, it can help us to identify action needs and recommendation for the main task of the OECD WPMN or the CPC to develop international standards for regulatory enforcement and innovation enhancements, in the sense of gaps and needs for the development of OECD test guidelines, guidance document, and reports. And on the other hand, the Early4AdMa can help to identify safety and sustainability issues of new materials, and then it could be linked to the innovation phase and support the OECD safer and sustainable innovation approach, which was also presented by another webinar and could be found at the OECD website if you are interested. And with this, next slide, I can hand over to my colleague Agnes Omen, and she will present you the background on the Early4AdMa.
Thank you, Catherine, and also welcome to all of you from my side. So I will present briefly some background to the Early4AdMa system, and also go into the connection to this safe and sustainable innovation approach So what is safe and sustainable innovation approach, but also how this links to the steering group on SIA under the OECD. So next slide, please. So as laid down also in the description of work for the steering group on advanced materials, one of the aims is to develop this strategic approach to support regulatory preparedness and safe and sustainable by design of advanced materials and their application. So this leads to different questions like, are regulations and methods or tools fit for advanced materials? Are there certain knowledge gaps that we should address, and are there concerns for safety and sustainability? And do we need to develop recommendations and options for actions that can be taken over as appropriate by decision makers? So how was this strategic approach developed? There was already an Early4AdMa system. I'll go into that in the next slide, which was used as a basis, and then with use of an experience with cases, this was further developed. Next slide, please. So a couple of years ago, there was this Early4AdMa system already developed by RVM in the Netherlands, but also by the German institutes VFR, BAUA, and UBA. In an earlier stage, this was still called the eWarn system, and later already the Early4AdMa. And then with the use, as I said, from case studies and the feedback from case studies, this was further developed. So it went from, let's say, the green brochure on the right-hand side of the slides to this nice glossy brochure on OSD that is now findable at the OSD website. And here the aims really are to identify and describe potential safety and sustainability issues, as well as regulatory issues for advanced materials in an early stage. So when advanced materials are just on the market or still in development. And in this sense, it is an anticipatory risk governance approach that intends to allow for timely decision making. And in that sense, it is the risk assessors and regulators that are the target audience, but this tool could also be used by innovators and researchers, and this will be addressed later in the presentation on the Early4AdMa system itself. So next slide, please. As I said, a few cases were already performed or applied to this Early4AdMa system. You can see here a number of cases. So last year in 2022, there were 2 cases. The first one, early 2022, the MXscenes, which was organized by the RVM in the Netherlands. At this stage, the aim of this workshop and case was still mainly to improve this Early4AdMa system and experience how it works, and not so much on really trying to identify signals related to the MXscenes. And this is also still, it's a gradual process going from the early cases where it's more focused on improving the system to, in the end, trying in later cases and also future cases to identify warnings and specific recommendations for actions regarding safety and sustainability. So in 2022, there were 2 cases, the MXscenes, but also by the Harmless project, the fiber aerogel mats for facade insulation. And those 2 cases were the main cases that were used to improve the former version of the Early4AdMa system. And then in June, there were another case on nanocarriers together with the silver cellulose by the ASINA project that is already applied to an improved or the current improved version of the Early4AdMa system. And you will hear later about the Harmless and the nanocarrier case at a later stage of this webinar. Next slide, please. So with this input, so feedback from especially the first 2 cases, but also general feedback, this Early4AdMa system was improved within the OSD steering group of advanced materials. The entire group was well informed on the progress, but there was a smaller group trying to elaborate and address all the comments that were made and improve this version, which is now published on the OSD website. And you can see here the nice glossy front side of this brochure. It should be noted, so it's publicly available. You can use it as a reference, but it's not a final document because future cases will be still there, and it is an ongoing process. And as relevant, still this Early4AdMa system will be improved as such. You can also see that there is a tool related to that here. So the link to the Early4AdMa system itself and a tool with the Excel sheets are included in the presentation. So next slide, please. And with that, I would like to go a bit further into the link to the safer and sustainable innovation approach. So this is another steering group under the WPMN, which is led by my colleague Lia Hernandez. I see she's also present in the audience today. Here there are some common interests which I would like to point out, but as perhaps first the next slide. First go a bit into the background of SIA. So SIA stands for Safer and Sustainable Innovation Approach. And it was really started with the realization from the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that there is a need to minimize adverse impacts of chemicals. And this is a major challenge that is not yet achieved. And we understand that we need to do more than is currently being done. And the SIA approach can help in that sense. So this is really a prevention approach, trying to address safety and sustainability for early stages of innovation. So it was also realized that safety and sustainability should be considered in more closely together. We see that advanced materials, as Katrien already pointed out, also give a promise to a more green and sustainable innovations. But at the same time, like indeed the energy transition, but at the same time also there is a need to consider the safety and sustainability of those advanced materials itself. So next slide, please. So SIA combines the regulatory preparedness concept. So is something coming to the market that is not really addressed already by the current regulations, and the safe and sustainable by design concept in order to minimize the possible health and environment risks, but also the sustainability impacts, and to try to do this in a timely manner during the innovation process. So as you can see here on the left upper side of the slide, the safe and sustainable innovation approach really tries to combine safety, sustainability, but also have an eye for the innovation so that there's also room for innovation in a safe and sustainable manner. And the SIA not only relies on the technical aspects, but really trying to have this dialogue between the industry and regulators from an early stage of the innovation process, and do this by developing a kind of trusted environment. And something that's also very key in the SIA approach is that it considers all the different life cycle stages. So it's not only about the materials itself, it's also about the manufacturing, the use phase, and the end of life. Next slide, please. So this is another figure on the SIA approach, really trying to support the innovation So really have an eye for the innovation, support the innovation, and also include in this the safety and the sustainability from an early stage onward. And doing this also by prioritizing the elements to be considered for safety and sustainability, not only an eye for the content, but also an eye for the process by having this continuous dialogue and a trusted environment between regulators and innovators, and also with other relevant stakeholders. Next click, please. Yeah, so in that sense, trying to transform towards a situation where there are safer and sustainable materials, but also processes and products together. So this is the background to the SIA approach. And if you can go to the next slide. So when looking at the different steering groups, so the steering group on advanced materials and the steering group on the safer and sustainable innovation approach, you can see that there are mutual interests related to the emerging materials, trying to assess safety and sustainability, and also the early stage of innovation. In this, the steering group on advanced materials focuses more on the regulatory preparedness side. So what kind of safety and sustainability issues can be foreseen for new advanced materials, and also are the regulations, but especially also the test methods, adequate for those advanced materials. Whereas SIA is a bit broader in this sense, with trying to address this combination of safe and sustainable by design, regulatory preparedness, and trusted environments together, and thereby supporting innovation. So how do we see this connection? It can be seen, for example, by joint case studies, where if the cases become more and more concrete, to work on those. But given the common interest, there is also this continuous connection and collaboration in the work that is being done. So it's good to keep that in mind, that there are two steering groups that are connected together here. And I think with that, we can go to the next slide. I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Elmer Swart, who has been doing a lot in the adapting of the Early4AdMa system, and will present to you more the details of the system itself. Elmer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Agnes, and hello to all participants. So it's indeed my pleasure to give a brief overview of what the Early4AdMa system actually is and how it works. So next slide, please. Agnes already explained the background, but I'll just repeat some parts briefly. So we've seen that advanced materials are key to solving global challenges, which is also laid out in various, well, for example, EU documents, but also industry initiatives. And so what we see is that many of these advanced materials have new or altered physical chemical characteristics and functionalities. But these new characteristics of functionalities also come with uncertainties regarding safety, sustainability, and applicability of regulation, for example, whether current test methods work sufficiently for these new advanced materials. So it's key to act on potential issues before problems arise. And this is how the Early4AdMa system can be used. Next slide, please. So the Early4AdMa system, as was already explained, is a tool in an anticipatory risk governance approach that allows for timely decision making. And it's a system that relies on existing data and expert assessment. So in no case during the in the system, it is the user asked to generate new data. It's relied on existing data, and it's a stepwise approach composed of 2 tiers and 7 steps. A schematic overview of these steps is presented on the right. And the outcome is really a report that describes the context, which I will explain briefly in a minute, the potential issues that were identified using the system, and what could be follow-up actions for a specific material or a group of advanced materials. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly explain the two tiers. So tier 1, it's a broad screening assessment. And it aims to identify advanced materials for further assessment. But it's an optional step because in many cases, you may already have an advanced materials that you want to further assess. But this step it starts with the scanning of the field. So this could be literature studies, but also assessing patent records, etc. And the idea is that based on these selected advanced materials, you do a quick scan on potential issues regarding safety, but also sustainability and regulation. And based on that quick scan, you come with a preliminary evaluation where you basically say, well, for this advanced materials, there are potential issues that I think we need to follow up on. And then you enter the second tier, which is tier 2. Next slide, please. And in many cases, as I said, if you, for example, work in a research program on a specific advanced materials, you could start at tier 2. And tier 2 is a detailed screening assessment composed of 3 main parts. So first is the context section in step 4. Then step 5 includes questions on safety, sustainability, and regulatory frameworks. And the final evaluation in step 6, in which you identify potential issues on follow-up actions. Next slide, please. So the step 4 context, this starts by basically collecting as much information as possible regarding safety, sustainability, etc. And this part should help the user to answer the questions in step 5 in a way that's relevant to the case. And it provides a context and also the relevance for the final evaluation. And in this context section, what you do is you describe the focus of the assessment. So what is the material that you're looking at, but also what are the applications that are considered? Because you can imagine that the outcome, the issues might be very application dependent. Further, you also report the market entry stage. And here in this section, you can also explain what the benefits of the innovation and material innovation are. For example, is the material going to be used for improved insulation, etc. This really puts the sort of the innovation in a broader context. Here you can also look at the socio-economical aspects because the Early4AdMa system currently doesn't have any questions on potential socio-economic issues. So if there are any obvious ones, that you could report them here. And the last main part of this section is where the users try to map the anticipated release compartments and transformation forms during the life cycle. So here you try to, you have an advanced materials and you try to assess, well, what are the compartments that this material could be released for the specific application? What are the release mechanisms and in which form are they released throughout the life cycle? And I will get back to this point later, but in the detailed assessment, in the next step, you try to assess all of these different forms throughout the life cycle in one assessment. Next slide, please. So step 5, this is really the core of the Early4AdMa system. It's it's composed of lists of questions related to 4 topics: human safety, environmental safety, regulatory frameworks, and sustainability. And here on the right, you see a list of some examples of questions related to applicability of regulatory frameworks. And the questions are phrased in such a way that the yes indicates a potential issue. And there's 4 possible answers. So yes, no, unknown, and not applicable. And there's also room for comments or clarifications. And as I said, the questions are phrased so that yes indicates a potential issue. And these then also need to be reported in the final evaluation. As you can see, for some questions, there's additional guidance. There's a guidance bit of text there. This indicates that we've provided extra guidance to help the user answering these questions. Next slide, please. So in total, there's about, I think, 40 questions on the different topics. And in the final evaluation, step 6, you, although the contents are not strictly defined in the current document, we think what it should include is a description of the context section. So what is the material? What is the focus of the assessment, manifestation forms, as well as the benefits. Then it's advised to provide a summary in text of the detailed assessment conducted in step 5, where you basically try to, well, you report on the identified issues and also the uncertainties. And this could be supplemented by a graphical summary, as you can see here on the right. Then lastly, it should also contain a proposal for follow-up actions. So you've identified potential issues, what should be the follow-up steps? Next slide, please. And before I finish, I'd like to make a few more clarifications on how to use the system. So first of all, who should use the system? As said, the system is developed for use as a pre-regulatory risk governance tool, and the output should help regulatory decision makers to take action to address potential issues within advanced materials. So it's to facilitate regulatory preparedness, as Agnes already explained. But to do a proper assessment, input from research, industry, and innovators is a requirement. For example, you need to collect information on physical chemical characteristics, but also the benefits and the application. And so it is envisioned that assessment within the system are conducted by a group of experts, ideally with representation from the different sectors, industry, academia, etc., and expert with different expertise, so sustainability, toxicology, etc. And although the system is primarily designed to support regulatory preparedness, to inform decision makers and policy makers, we also foresee that the system can be used for other purposes, for example, by industry to facilitate safe by design. Next slide, please. I think it's good to repeat this again. So Early4AdMa is an expert-based system. And the questions that are in step 5 should be answered on the basis of a specific literature. But in many cases, such specific literature on the advanced material may not be available. And in those cases, you are asked to do an expert assessment to the extent feasible. And where this is not feasible, you have to report it and answer it as unknown. Next slide, please. How to deal with uncertainty. This is a very tricky question. In the early stages of a product development, the data on safety and sustainability is often scarce or lacking. So it's good to reiterate that the goal of the system is not to provide a definitive safety sustainability assessment, but rather the goal is to identify potential issues, including information gaps, so that follow-up options can be taken. In many cases, there may not be any specific evidence, but the absence of clear evidence does not mean that experts should fill in unknown by default. In fact, the assessment is performed in a conservative way, so an indication rather than a clear evidence is sufficient to identify an issue of concern or to identify a gap of information. Just one example. Let's say you have one of the questions in the human safety assessment is there an indication of persistency due to low dissolution or degradation rate in any physiological relevant media? Well, this information may not be available for a new advanced material. But if you know that advanced material is composed of materials that do not or hardly dissolve, even in the absence of specific information, you could answer yes here. And I think this is my last slide. So with these final notes, I'll like to give the floor to Wendel Wohleben from BASF, who's going to talk about the case studies within the Harmless project that used the Early4AdMa system to test on the case studies. The floor is yours, Wendel.
Thank you very much, Elmar. So it's my pleasure to report to you today about the workshop that was organized jointly by the Harmless Project and the OECD steering group ADMA. I'll do this also today on behalf of Blanca, who cannot be in this webinar today. Next, please. This workshop was positioned in November last year, which also implies that all of the conclusions that I'm going to report today refer to the state of development at that time. And the focus of our workshop was one specific case, and that was this insulation system. Next, please. So here is the technical basis of what we assessed in this workshop. And you can see the illustrative figure on the lower right. There are different technical solutions that are more or less advanced or more or less conventional to do the insulation of your house. You could have glass wool, stone wool, you could have porous ceramic systems, or you could have a vacuum insulation panel. That's this shiny piece on the left. And the aerogel material is already on the market, but at a relatively smaller scale, but it is a commercial product. And it allows, that's the advantage of the material due to the high porosity, to suppress the thermal transport by the gases. And so you achieve a better insulating power at a lower thickness of the insulating material. So on the left-hand side, then, we list the safer by design concern, which is the high porosity, and if it is fragmented, this may lead to nanoscale releases, which may have some kind of reactivity. Because the aerogel itself is not mechanically stable, it is being commercialized in the form of a fiber aerogel mat. These are meter scale dimensions, but if they release fiber fragments, also this could be a concern. And then also we know that there are organic modifications. It's very important in this context to also remember the safe and sustainable by design space. So what do we mean by design space? This is the liberty that the producer has in terms of the composition, in terms of the choice of fiber support or the organic modification to change the material. Still, the intended functionality needs to be achieved. And very importantly, there are conventional alternatives. So there's also a known market, there is a known use of these materials, there's a known scenario. Next, please. In this workshop, we tested this one case study in 1+4 concepts. So that was the basic idea of the workshop. You can see that we applied, of course, the Early4AdMa at that development state that it had at that time. And in the middle, you see we also embedded the perspective of the Advanced Materials Initiative, the AMI 2030, which gives us a very good idea of the coming attractions on the market. And then we applied on the lower right, the so-called Arvidsson scheme, which is mostly also a regulatory preparedness tool. And then we have two tools that have maybe more of an SSBD perspective. They are maybe more oriented towards the innovators, and that's on the top right, the Kennedy et al. Tool from the US ERDC, and on the middle at the bottom, the Innomat Life tool from a German nationally funded project. All of these have advantages and disadvantages, and so in the next few slides, we will look at some strengths and weaknesses of these schemes, and we'll come to conclusions afterwards. Next, please. In this workshop, we clearly saw that participants had a different level of pre-knowledge, pre-exposure to these different schemes. If you just want to look at the red bars, maybe, the red bars tell you I am quite familiar. So many of our participants were quite familiar with the Advanced Materials Roadmap. the AdMa 2030 manifesto and roadmap. And also still many were familiar with the Early4AdMa. But for all of the other 3 schemes, most of the participants were not familiar and had no experience. Our composition of 61 participants was good. It was diverse, many different countries represented and different types of participants from all of the categories you see on the left. Now, on the next slide, we will look first into the Arvidsson et al. Scheme, which has the advantages of being very simple, of being based on an OECD test guiding, which means that for certain materials, it will be data rich. It provides a graphical visualization, and it had very clear guiding questions that made it simple for, at least simple for the experts, to apply the scheme. So these were the main advantages we saw in the workshop. On the other hand, we saw that it did not look at regional hotspots. It did not really give guidance on how to consider no data, absence of data. By intention, it only looked at aquatic toxicity, and it was not easy to assess borderline data. And overall, this tool was thought to be too global for SSBD purposes, but still it was maybe more oriented towards regulatory preparedness. And it did not provide a proxy to address toxicity, for instance, by other mechanisms such as leaching, dissolution, or grouping. This this breakout group was led by Anders Baun, who was one of the inventors of the scheme. Next, please. Then we had both Agnes and Andrea, so 2 of the co-developers of the Early4AdMa, for the breakout groups as moderators. As advantages, we saw that it had was a good example of translating ideas into practical aspects for regulators. It was thought to be useful and easy for experts, and it was very holistic, considered all issues. Participants found it easy to follow to provide qualitative output or to identify gaps. And it was meant to be complementary to the JRC draft framework for an SSBD assessment. So the conclusions were that for expert, it's easy to implement due to the guiding questions. The disadvantages included the challenge to apply it to early stage. There was a large amount of detailed data needed, and that also made it time consuming, and not only one expert, but different experts from different disciplines would be required to fill it. Sustainability was not sufficiently addressed at that point. More guidance was required, and we thought that the scoring system was not entirely clear. And that also clearly then made the summary that uncertainty and scoring system should be improved. Next, please. Finally, we looked at the Inomat Life scheme, where I was one of the co-inventors. It was seen as an advantage that this scheme provides an identification of conventional versus advanced materials, because you always want to have a point of comparison. It was flexible. It allowed the use of any regional definition of what's nano or not nano. It focused on unknown and unregulated materials. And it's not a risk screening, but a start to identify the typical use scenario. So the flexibility and the differentiation between advanced and conventional materials were the summary of our advantages. But the disadvantages was that materials may be overlooked, release what was not considered at all at the time, and atypical uses were not considered. And so these were the 2 main disadvantages that were summarized. Putting it all together, next, please. I'm sorry for the small print on the left-hand side. I copied this directly from the report. We summarized that low-tier schemes, such as the Arvidsson et al. Or Inomat Life, could in fact be integrated as earlier steps into the more complex Early4AdMa scheme, and thus the categorization and assessment by the lower tier schemes may prioritize and guide the safety and sustainability assessment, also by using the conventional materials as a point of comparison. We also noted that the availability of data, as Agnes also just mentioned, is of course a big issue. In that view, the Inomat Life and Arvidsson schemes were easier to apply because the availability of data was not such an issue. We also noted that the level of expertise was very different for the different schemes, and especially the Early4AdMa required experts from different disciplines, such as chemists, toxicologists, or sustainability experts. And in this session, we had all those expertises present, but how would that be implemented if you don't want to devote an entire workshop? We also identified some missing elements, and I'm very happy to see today that many of those deficiencies have been addressed already in the revised strategic approach. But also for the Arvidsson and also for the Inomat Life scheme, clearly opportunities for improvement were identified. Finally, we noted that the present workshop was devoted to a high TRL case, a material that is on the market from several suppliers in significant quantities. And so the findings on especially data scarceness would be even worse for a material that is in an early stage of development. This needs to be kept in mind. You can download this report since earlier this month. We are very happy that it is declassified and available. My next slide, please, is the final one. There's a second output from this workshop, and that you see on the left-hand side, that the Harmless project has very much improved based on the learnings from this workshop. So we have learned a lot in this workshop. And so the AMEA approach, as we call it now, builds on the learnings from Inomat Life and the workshop. We added specific recommendations, life cycle considerations. We defined the entry into the decision support system, and we focus a lot now on the redesign of safer by design versions of an ADMA during R&D. And this figure is just illustrative, but those of you who have been in the workshop will recall that the different colors shown here, being nano-enabled or not, consisting of particles or not, being an advanced material or being a multi-component material, all these were categories of the Inomat Life, and now we link them directly to recommendations for further testing and assessment. This is currently under peer review in a special issue on advanced materials in Environmental Science Nano. If anyone else wants to contribute, you're very welcome until end of November. Thank you.
So I will continue. I hope you can hear me properly. Sorry for a not active camera today. So my name is Doris Völker. I'm a scientific employee at the German Environment Agency, and I will give you a short overview of the case study we have performed just a few months ago on nanocarriers and how we applied the Early4AdMa as part of this case study. Next slide, please. So for your orientation, the nanocarrier case study was performed this year with a more advanced version of the Early4AdMa system, which already considered some of, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I think the sound is a little bit sketchy.
Okay.
Okay, if you can
Sorry for that.
Now it's better. Thank you.
Oh, okay, maybe I will.
Perhaps just.
So I'm already at my headphone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So please tell me if it's getting worse again. So the Early4AdMa version we used was already the one which was a bit more advanced than the one which was used for the Hamlis case. The nanocarrier case study we performed was organized by the Federal Institute for Risk Assessment in Germany and by us, the German Environment Agency, in cooperation with the EU-funded project ASILA, which inter alia also performs research on encapsulated silver for cosmetic application. Next slide, please. So in our case study, we consider nanocarriers as carrier systems, which usually protect and transport active
Doris,
substance.
I'm sorry. This is not working. I was wondering if we can go. I'm just thinking if we can go to turn to Catherine and then go back to you to see if you can fix the sound.
Yeah.
Okay. So
sorry for that.
No worries. Things happen. Kimiko, can you please go to the slide for the future case studies while and then we can go back to Doris. Thank you.
Sorry, Ma.
If it does not improve with Doris' connection, I could also try to take over the slides on the
Sorry for interrupting again. I changed the setting. Is it better now?
Okay, let's give it a try. Yes, I go back. Sorry for that, everyone. If it doesn't work, we go back to Catherine, but it should be working. Thank you, Doris.
Yeah, sorry for that. The connection is today somehow crazy, but I will try to continue. So in that case study, we understood nanocarrier as carrier systems, usually for active substances to transport and protect active substances, and the carriers itself are considered to be smaller than 1,000 nanometers in at least one dimension. And as already mentioned, they are used to protect and transport active substances, but also support their sustained release. And as you may know, nanocarriers.
Doris, I'm sorry. We'll have to turn it over to Catherine if you don't mind. Yeah, because otherwise the interpreters won't be able to translate.
Okay.
Sorry for that.
Yeah, then I continue and hope that I'm as familiar with the slides as Doris is. So nanocarrier promises, so we choose nanocarrier as they promises benefits for various fields of applications. For instance, for the targeted application of new therapies, and yeah, also to have less demand of active substances. And first applications are already established for medicinal products, but applications for other fields are approaching, like for pesticides, biocides, cosmetics, and foods. We thought that nanocarriers features an example for advanced materials with many different types of application, and therefore a differentiated discussion on early warning assessment is needed. And the aim was to apply the Early4AdMa system to identify knowledge gaps and also signals of possible concerns regarding safety and sustainability, and also to then come up with action needs and recommendations. The online workshop took place in the middle of June of this year, and we had up to 64 participants from 80 member and observer countries by the European Commission, industry here, BIAC, ICAPO, and UPAC. And stakeholders took place from regulatory parties, academia, industry, and NGOs. Next slide, please. So the scope of the workshop was that we had setting the scene sessions where we had several presentations which gave an overview on nanocarriers as such, on their application, but also how these materials can be synthesized. Then the session also includes presentations on selected examples of a certain kind of nanocarrier and their applications. And we choose the application cosmetics, plant protection products, and pharmaceuticals. And within the first breakout group discussion, we applied the step 5 of the Early4AdMa system to identify and discuss signals on the topics safety assessment on human health, safety assessment on environment, regulatory frameworks, and sustainability. And the cases we had discussed were a nanocarrier for skin care application, a nanocarrier for fungicidal application, and a potential case of nanocarrier for a chemotherapeutical application. And the second breakout group discussion, we then evaluated and formulated follow-up actions. The aim here was to identify topics of the biggest concern, biggest data gap, so the topic of the biggest data gap, and of these 3 applications. We then formulated follow-up actions, and also these addresses who should take over these actions based on the discussion from the first breakout group session. And we also collected feedback on the gaps and ambiguities of the Early4AdMa system. Next slide, please. So what were the lessons learned from the nanocarrier cases we discussed? The one main point is that these nanocarriers are quite complex systems, and due to their complexity, it's difficult, or it's important to differentiate considerations that are made with respect to the implication which originates from the carrier itself, where the source that originated from the carcass, meaning the active substance, but also where those issues originated from the entirety of the nanocarrier system as such. For the discussed cases, the identified implications for safety mainly origins from the active substances, which are mainly well known, while the contribution of the carrier to the signals remains low or unknown. And yes, this issue requires an adequate reflection on the origin of the signals within the reporting. There were also a number of knowledge gaps identified. This includes the toxic potential of the carrier, the change in fate and effect of the active substances due to the carrier, the resource demand during the whole life cycle, so meaning from the extraction of the raw materials, the synthesis up to the use. But also there were knowledge gaps with regards to waste consideration during the production. On the right side of this figure, you can see a visualization of the outcomes of one of the example here, the fungicidal application with respect to human health and environment safety. A further point that was identified that there's only a few regulatory frameworks worldwide considering the influence of the nanocarrier within their application, or which provides sufficient guidance for assessment of nanocarriers. And yeah, that the situation differs between countries and regulatory areas. And the last main point is that test methods are needed to investigate and evaluate to which extent transport and the transport and the protection of the carrier can influence the fate and the effect of the active substance. Next slide, please. Based on this finding, various next steps were recommended in this report. With regards to the signals identified for nanocarrier, the first recommendation is to obtain an overview of ongoing research activities to, on one hand, fill data gaps, but also to substantiate the identified signals. That the data gaps need to be closed. And the main points here are to provide information on the influence of the carrier on the fate and the effect of the active substance, but also with respect to sustainability, to provide information on resource consumption over the whole life cycle and waste consideration during, for instance, the production phase. Review and amend where necessary affected application and assessment guidance, and establish harmonized test methods and analytic methods. And with regard to the applicability of the Early4AdMa system, the main recommendations are identify step 5 questions which may offer a differentiated response for the different building blocks of an advanced materials to 8 cases with similar challenges like for the nanocarrier. That means for cases for which signals are driven mainly by one component, which could be, for instance, a non-advanced component of the whole advanced material. And then propose solution how to deal with such questions while ensuring that the overall assessments relates to the entirety of the advanced materials. And there will be a workshop report which is currently under preparation, and as soon as it's finished and be approved by the OECD, it will be publicly available at the OECD website. Next slide, please. And with this, I can come to the further case studies we have on the list within the steering group. Next slide, please. So we still have 3 cases under discussion, but also under discussion how to move forward with these examples. Next slide, please. Though the first one is a case study that was proposed by the EU Horizon 2020 project Sunshine. And this is a case study which also again focuses on the applicability of the Early4AdMa system as such. And here a comparative assessment of 2 methodologies are aimed to be undertaken. So the one is the Early4AdMa OECD approach, and the other one is the approach that has been developed in the Sunshine project. And these case study should be performed on 2 so-called multi-component nanomaterials in order to identify the target users of both approaches. What are the similarities between both approaches? Where are complementaries? And are there areas for collaboration between these approaches? And as I said, there are 2 multi-component nanomaterials under discussion that then should be examined with both approaches. One is a multi-component nanomaterial to improve the fire safety, and another one is to improve performance of building materials. Next slide, please. And there are 2 further case studies that were proposed. One is on graphene and graphene-related materials. There's an interest by a couple of delegations within the steering group to perform such a case study. So like Spain, Germany, and Sweden, but others also quite interested. We started a liaison with the former graphene flagship, but also with follow-up projects on graphene-related materials to explore collaboration opportunities. There's also a coordinated input planned by a further project proposal from South Africa on a literature study on graphene and methods for physical chemical characterization. But of course, the steering group is looking for additional delegations that are interested to participate in these case studies. And the next step here is to develop a case study, a roadmap for the case study, that we find a way how to break down such important and complex topic to meaningful case study. And the second or the third case study, which is still under discussion, was proposed by the United States, which is on 3D printing. And here the United States initiated a project on studying a number of filament materials for 3D printing, and where they generate data for these filaments. And the aim is that for at least 2 of these filaments, the data can be used for a case study. There was also an interest expressed by Germany to contribute to such a case studies. And also here, the steering group are looking forward for additional delegations that are interested to participate in the case study. And as for the graphene, there are currently ongoing discussion how to organize such a case study. Next slide, please. Yeah, and last but not least, we would like to invite you to apply the Early4AdMa system in case you have a case study. So you can find more details in the document, the Early4AdMa document, where all the questions and the background are described, but also where guidance is given how to understood and certain questions, and where information could be found to answer these questions. And this document is accompanied by an Excel tool that allows you a structured response to the questions, and give you also a structured and visualized output to your answers in time. And you can also find this tool at the OECD website. And I think with this, I hand over to my co-chair Agnes for the concluding remarks.
Yeah, so I have the honor to present to you the concluding remarks, which is pretty brief. So if you can go to the next slide. I have one slide to wrap up today's webinar before we go to the questions and answers. With this webinar, we hope that we provided information to you on the activities within the OECD Steering Group on Advanced Materials, and particularly to the Early4AdMa system as a tool for regulatory preparedness, and how this has been applied to cases with at first more focus on developing the system, and now more and more towards really developing signals related to the materials, and also the outlook, what kind of future cases are foreseen already. And with that, we really would like to reach out to you, just as Catherine mentioned. So this is really also an invitation to use the Early4AdMa system, with a link here to you to find it, but it can also be easily findable via Google at the OSD website. It's also an sorry. Sorry. It's also an invitation to bring cases to the OSD Steering Group on Advanced Materials, if you're interested in doing so. In addition to that, feedback in general, be it on the experience of applying it to cases or in general, Any feedback on the Early4AdMa system is much appreciated, and this will also be used in considerations for future updates. And then as a more general reach out, so today we presented this Early4AdMa system with especially how to identify safety and sustainability issues and regulatory issues for advanced materials. But part of this Early4AdMa system is also the first step, scanning the field on what new advanced materials are upcoming, and this is still a bit underdeveloped, and any relevant advanced materials that are identified by you, you are very interested in, but also approaches like horizon scanning to identify new advanced materials are also much appreciated if you have ideas on this. And then also one of the next steps is bringing the signals related to specific advanced materials into practice. And to do so, we need those potential follow-up actions, but also how to bring this under the attention of the right people and see what is really needed and what is perhaps less key to address. So also ideas on this aspect. It will be a topic of the steering group for the next year or the next years. So if you are interested to contribute to that, you're very much welcome to join this steering group. And with this, I finalize the concluding remarks, and I would like to hand over to Mar, who is organizing the questions and answers.
Okay, thank you so much, Agnes, and thank you everyone, and an apology for the sound issues. So now I would like to invite you. I can see that there are a couple of questions already in the Q&A, so I will first ask the speakers if they can just turn on their camera and start looking at the questions that you have received. And also, but before we go to the questions, perhaps just to ask if there's anything else that you wish to add to the discussion, to something that one of your colleagues have presented today. And otherwise, just if we can just go to the questions. So let me see. Okay, we have one question regarding how would the initial screening be done? This feels like a more complex task than was presented on the slide. So Agnes, perhaps I can give you the floor to this one.
I briefly addressed that already in the concluding remarks, but this is a really good question and not an easy topic indeed. So it is a complex task to have the horizon scanning, see what kind of advanced materials are upcoming and are also relevant to consider in this Early4AdMa system. So of course, much of the work on on material science, what kind of materials are coming to the market is part of the intellectual property of companies and SMEs. So we will need somehow to reach out to those, perhaps also in collaboration with the steering group on safer and sustainable innovation approach to use a kind of trusted environment so that industries are feel safe to share this kind of information. And in addition to that, more from a scientific point of view, there are materials and information ongoing in the scientific literature. How do we gather that? How do we see what kind of innovations are coming to us? But yeah, as indicated, this is something that's very complex and needs more thoughts, and we need to develop this further in the coming years. So very welcome if people can contribute to this.
Thank you very much, Agnes. So there is a question here. Should this system be used by regulators or industry, and who will apply it? And Catherine, can I invite you to answer this question?
Yeah, thank you. So as already indicated also in the presentation by Almar, this Early4AdMa is sought as a pre-regulatory tool for regulatory preparedness, and with this, the first audience or addressee for this approach are regulators, to identify issues for materials or its upcoming application. But still, this approach is also open for industry to apply it for their innovations, to see if there might be some issues on safety or sustainability, or even regulatory coverage might come up. And who will apply it? So we hope that there are many people out there that are interested to apply this approach to their materials they have in focus. But at least at the OECD level, we aim to apply this approach to further cases, to identify if there are issues, but also to see if the method needs further improvements.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We have another question. So there's a question about for regulatory readiness, and it says, once relevant regulations have been identified, it might be useful to examine if an advanced materials can be unambiguously described by a relevant basic regulatory term. So for example, substance, mixture, article, nanoform, active substance, medical device, etc. Agnes, please.
Yeah, this is also a very good question. The regulatory terms that are mentioned here are much European oriented, like the substance, mixture, article, nanoform, active substance. Of course, the OSD is something global, but it is relevant to consider for regulations whether there is an advanced materials, how it is recognized in a regulation, and also what the implications thereof are. So it's important to see if, well, there can be differences between one place compared to another, but then still this is a relevant question to consider and see how that impacts the regulation. And of course, the answers can be different all around the world. But this is it has implications how a material is considered in the regulation, and thus it's good to take into account. And it's not as such specifically related to an advanced material, but it's another signal that may be relevant to take into account here for the regulatory preparedness in general. Sorry for being a bit up and down with my answers. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Agnes. And I know that it's are not easy questions to answer, because we're still, I mean, it's like learning by doing, and we have gone from different stages on this. So I'm really glad that you answered the questions. We have another question regarding how can we be involved in the case studies. Catherine, you presented that section, so perhaps you can answer that.
There are, I would say, Mara, please correct me if I'm wrong. There are two ways to participate. On the one hand is you can go via your national delegation to approach to OECD WPMN and become a nominated expert to the steering group. But we also plan to have expert workshops on selected case studies. So there might be also a chance to participate in these expert workshops, and via, for instance, inform Mar if you have some input to certain cases.
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. And indeed, I mean, at the OECD, as Catherine presented at the beginning of the webinar, we have working like an official body that is comprising nominated experts from OECD delegations. So these are like the OECD countries. but we also have a representative from industry, from environmental NGOs, from animal welfare organizations that help us to have like quite a broad overview and to take into account the needs from different stakeholders. So you can either approach one of them, or if you are you are working on a specific case and you wish to share that case with the OECD and to work further, you can also contact me. So I will share later on the slide where you have my contact details, and we will be very happy to. I will be very happy to liaise with you and explain you in more detail how to participate. I see there was another question also regarding participation for the graphene case study. So we have had some already online some reminders that we have some delegations that have also signed up to participate on this on graphene-based materials, such as Italy. But if you are interested in joining this workshop and provide expert inputs, please contact me following the webinar. I will be happy to follow up with you. And I'm trying to see, okay, there is another question regarding what is expected to happen once a signal warning is identified with the Excel tool. So who takes care of the follow-up? Agnes, I see you smiling, so perhaps this is...
Yeah, it's all good questions today. So yeah, of course, the first step is to have a signal, something that and the follow-up has to be really taken into account. And there are different options here. So it can be something to raise the attention on a certain topic. And the OECD and especially also the WPMN is a very broad network. So there are lots of connections to regulatory agencies, to the different countries with the delegates that are involved. So raising the attention is already a very important step. And in addition to that, some follow-up actions may be very close to the issues related to OSD itself. Like if for a 2D material like MXenes, there is a signal related to the sample preparation and dosimetry that is very difficult for such materials, it can be something to be taken up also in the work plan of OECD. So these are all kinds of different signals and how follow-up can be taken up. Of course, it's not the full responsibility of OSD to do something, but raising the awareness and seeing what can be done is something that can be done within OSD.
Thank you, Agnes. I have a question regarding the trusted environment, and it says, how does the trusted environment work? And just to remind participants, this is related to the work on the safer and sustainable innovation approach. And I was wondering if anyone, I mean, I can give it a try to the answer, but what we're trying to do with the safer and sustainable innovation approach, I mean, we have three main components: the safer and sustainable by design. We have regulatory preparedness, and all these. The idea is that all this can be put in place if we have a trusted environment where we can have like an early dialogue between innovators and regulators, and to have some kind of feedback at a very early stage or before you start the development of our specific materials. And what we're doing right now in the OECD is to try to develop, with Dr. Lia Hernandez, we're trying to develop some kind of template of confidential agreement, for example. What are the different elements that needs to be put in place to create such an environment where there could be like an open dialogue and without stumbling in some of the confidential related issues. So perhaps one of the things that I would like to encourage you is to look at the webinar that was presented last year on the safer and sustainable innovation approach. I will just add the link via the Q&A so you can see it. And if you need more information, you can, of course, contact us. We are really looking right now at reaching out to small and medium enterprises, to innovators, to try to think with them what are the different elements that will make it easier for them in order to start applying SSBD consideration in developing new materials. So I hope that that can help. But I don't know if anyone wants to add something, or it's okay. Yeah. Okay. So I will type my answer with the link to you, so you can have it. And there was one question that I took from the chat, which was, is the SSBD description that we develop within the OECD in line with the EU SSBD framework? Wendell, perhaps you can help me out with that?
I will not be able to report on the OECD work as a whole, but from the timestamp of that question, it occurred to me that it was referring to the Harmless presentation. So I will reply for Harmless, okay?
Yeah.
The dimensions of SSBD that we refer to in the sense of an LCA-based assessment and socioeconomic assessment and occupational safety, etc., the dimensions are aligned with the dimensions that was also addressed in the draft of the EU SSBD. The stepwise approach is different, and I think for any of the schemes that we heard today, they are at best complementary, but none of them is an identical to or an implementation of the EU SSBD draft framework. On this occasion, I want to highlight the point that in her introduction, Agnes referred to early in the sense of just on the market or even in development. This is actually late for industry in that sense because it's already on the market. And the EU SSBD wants to support industry also in the design and redesign during R&D. So today in the discussion, I very much liked how we differentiated between regulatory preparedness and SSBD. These are two different needs and two different levels of detail that can be addressed. So this should be kept in mind when we compare these different schemes and also the EU SSBD.
Thank you very much, Wendell. That's a very good point. And perhaps just to further a little bit on that, on the work that we are currently doing within the steering group on the safer and sustainable innovation approach, there is a review of integrative tools. So these are like tools that address different elements of SSBD, and to review what are the similarities, what is the screening and the stage of innovation that they will be addressed. And it's, as you say, Wendell, is early in the majority of the tools is when it's already in the market. And what we're trying to look as a further step is how you can go to the step before. But this is something that is still, and it's a question mark that's not only OECD, but many others are also trying to solve. And hopefully we can make steps toward that end. Let me see. There is a question about what are the next steps on advanced materials at the OECD. So I think I'm just going to put on the spot the chair of the steering group, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Mar, for putting me on the spot. Yeah, so the next steps are to perform the further case studies we still have on the list, but also to finalize the case studies we currently performed, like the nano carrier workshop, to publish the outcomes. But of course, we are also open for further case studies if there are suggestions, but also if there are input from delegations to be able to perform further case studies. This can be done by this Early4AdMa approach, but we are also open to apply other approaches to identify signals and information gaps. And then we have to identify which of these actions that needs to be undertaken can be handled within the WPMN like Agnes already indicated, there might be needs for test guideline development or further assessment guidance that needs to be amended, that we see how we can work together with the other steering groups within the WPMN to bring these gaps and needs forward. And of course, we are also in exchange with other OECD bodies and or projects outside the OECD to facilitate the work on advanced materials and to improve the knowledge of not just of ourselves but also the others about advanced materials, but also on the issues that may come up on safety and sustainability.
I think there was one question left, but Agnes, let me know if you already answered this one. It says, how would the initial screening be done? This feels like a more complex task than was presented in the slides.
It was the first question, Mar.
Okay.
I hope it
So
is addressed.
Yeah, so it was, sorry for that, because I think I missed to put that it was answered live. And I don't see more questions, so I think the presentations have provided sufficient information for the moment. But if you can go to the next slide, Kimiko. Okay. So I just want to remind you, I mean, I have been sharing via the chat a number of links. All the OECD publications are free of charge, of course, so you can just retrieve them online. I just want to remind you also that the webinar will be made available, the recording will be made available online. And I just share with you some of the links here that might be of your interest. And I'm also adding my contact detail just in case that, like we saw before, that some colleagues wanted to participate or were interested in the discussions regarding future case studies, for example, on the graphene or the 3D material. So feel free to contact me and we will respond as soon as possible. Mails float, but we're very eager to reach out to those that are willing to help us with their expertise. All the recordings, you will receive it as you register for this webinar as soon as they're ready. So later this week, you will be receiving an email from the OECD with the link to the recording. And we just hope that you have enjoyed the webinar and that we can see you in future webinars or hopefully in some of the future workshops. So with this, I just want to thank Yannick and Nicole for all the interpretation. It's not obvious to do to stay focused on this on topics that sometimes can be very technical. But thank you so much for joining us today and facilitating Spanish for those that wanted to join or couldn't understand English. And with this, thank you so much to my speakers. And I just say goodbye and hopefully to see you in a future meeting. Goodbye.
Thank you all for joining.